Hi guys. I've gone through most of your diagnostics so far, and so this is a follow-up video that is to show you some of the things that a lot of people had issues with while I was reading them, and that you needed to work on in the future. Sometimes I don't give the best feedback on like the paper itself, but this way I can go through and explain it in a little more detail. So we're just going to go down this little list that I have here of different things, and then that'll be it for the video. So first of all, one thing that I think almost everyone needed to work on was using more detail. And this will definitely come up in the literacy narratives that you write in the future, but details are your friends. In all the papers that we're going to write, you're going to want to explain things in as much detail as you can, because it will make your papers easier to write. It'll take up more space, but it will also make them better. It'll make them easier to read and easier to understand. So adding detail to a sentence in the simplest version, if you have an undetailed sentence, it can be very vague, like this one. I bought groceries at the store. So that's a very simple sentence, a very boring sentence. There are definitely better ways that we could write it, though. So let's try one of those now. Let's just try to add in details to this to make it more interesting. I bought groceries. What kind of groceries did we buy? Bread, Cheetos, and diet soda. And we'll say we bought them at HEB. There you go. That's a much more interesting sentence. I bought bread, Cheetos, and diet soda at HEB last night during the rainstorm. Some of these things I would actually buy at HEB, but it makes it more interesting that I've written it this way, because I've told people a place, I've told them a time, I've told them what's going on, and I've given them more of what I'm actually buying. I've told more of the story this way, and taken up 3 times as much space. So in your own sentences, this could mean telling me more about your family, telling me more about what you want to do with your careers, your high school experience, whatever it is that you were talking about in the diagnostic papers. It would just mean expanding on that. Thesis and intro. A lot of you guys were missing this part of it. This was part of the assignment, was to put in an intro and a thesis statement that needed to be underlined. And some of you guys underlined things that weren't really thesis statements. So an intro needs to take us from whatever it is that we're familiar with and bring us into the story. This would, for most of this diagnostic that you were writing, this would be explaining who you are and where you're from and what it is that you're studying, or something like that. And then your thesis would be something that would just be your main idea for your paper. So for this one, it would probably be explaining in brief what you're here to study and why. Something like that would be fine. You don't have to explain like your writing issues and all of that stuff in here, but just a basic sentence explaining what you're talking about. Next issue we had was comma splices. We had a surprising number of comma splices from a lot of different people. And the reason that those happen is because what you're doing is you're writing complete sentences, but you're using commas instead of periods. And if you're doing that, then it's a really easy fix. You just need to understand where the sentence begins and ends, and either replace the commas that you have with periods a lot of times, or you need to add some fanboys if you want to make them longer and more interesting. So here's a common splice. I went to the store, my cat needed food, and I have a comma here. Again, so maybe the reason that I'm using a comma here is because I'm trying to make my sentences longer. If I have two sentences here, they would be extremely short and choppy. So if I want to, I can add because there, and now it's a complete sentence. But alternatively, I can just replace my comma here with a period, and then I also have a complete sentence. Yeah, if you're making those a lot, it's just going to take some practice. Making sure that if you have a subject and a predicate and you have a complete thought, then that's a complete sentence. And that means that if you want to connect it to something else, you either need to use a fanboys or you need to or just use a period and make it its own sentence. Next one here, fragments, sprawls, and run-ons. These are problems that every freshman I've ever worked with has had a little bit. Fragments there's three different kinds of fragments. You're just missing one of those three things that I just talked about. You're either missing a subject, you're missing a predicate, or you don't have a complete thought. In any of those cases, then what you need is just to complete the sentence. And usually whatever is missing from the sentence will be right there, because right there next to it in some other place. Usually you'll have a complete sentence that's just a simple sentence, and then you'll have a fragment right after that. And it's just a matter of punctuating it correctly. If you have your fragment, and it's like this one here, what would this, in this case, I bought groceries is a complete sentence. It is not a fragment, but because I went to the store is a fragment. And it's only a fragment on paper. If you were to say this in real life, it wouldn't be a fragment, right? So if we just take this out and we make it into a single sentence, then it works just fine. Should there be a comma there? No, it's fine. Alright, run-ons would be if you had this same sentence like this, where, no, with no period. So a run-on is two sentences crammed together without any punctuation in between. And just like the last time, you just need to add a fanboys, or you need to punctuate it correctly, and you can make it into one sentence, or you could break it up and make it into two sentences. Either way is just fine. And then sprawls are when you have too many connecting words in a sentence, so that you lose track of where the sentence started by the time you get to the end. Cat food is two words, I guess. There's some issues going on here, but yeah, this is a sentence sprawl because I mean you can technically write a sentence this way, but by the time you get to the end of it, you've gone on this whole journey and there's no punctuation in here to connect it together. So if you have sentences that look like this, what you need to do is find ways to cut them down and make them simpler. I went to the store to buy cat food because my cat was hungry, period. My cat wouldn't stop screaming and was keeping me up all night, period. I drove there at 2 a.m. and the store was closed, period. So you could break this into 3 sentences and it would work, but the way it is now, it doesn't really work. Tense shifts. So this is one that you guys did surprisingly well on, but I want to review it anyway. I borrowed this from a website called EnglishGrammarHere.com. And this is kind of a look at some of the different tenses. Now, what a lot of people will do is they will end up adding a lot of the word had and the word was and the word had been into their past tense stories where it doesn't really belong. And so when you say, like in this example here, I studied English yesterday, that's simple past tense. That is a thing that happened in the past. But if you said, I was studying English yesterday, that's called past continuous. And if you're saying, I was driving to the store yesterday, I was buying groceries, I was eating pizza over and over again, then that's incorrect because you should only use past continuous to explain some condition that was happening in your story when it began, rather. Past perfect is when you put had in front of whatever your verb is. I had studied English. If you said, and if you're using had over and over again, you're doing the same thing. If you're saying, I had studied English, I had cooked dinner, and then I had visited my grandma, then you're putting everything in past perfect instead of past tense. And you only want to use past perfect if you are explaining why you're doing something that you're doing in your story. You'd say something like, I opened the fridge, I had forgotten to buy milk, and so we didn't have any milk. I got my car keys and got in the car. So that would be an example of how you would use past perfect. You're only going to drop that in there every now and then. Past perfect continuous, probably avoid this one. I had been studying. Again, this would go at the very beginning of a story or something that you were telling or a scene that you were talking about, and where you would explain what was happening up until the point when the story starts, and then everything else would be in past tense. Mostly you just need to stick to normal past tense. I studied English yesterday, I drove to the store, I bought groceries, I ate lasagna. Alright guys, that video went a lot longer than I was hoping it would, but hopefully this will clarify anything that you had questions about. Good luck everyone. See you all in the comments.